Moscow, Idaho, a peaceful college town nestled against the Palouse Hills, was known more for wheat fields and student life than headlines. But in the early hours of November the 13th, 2022, a crime so brutal unfolded that it would shock the entire country. Inside a modest off-campus rental home on King Road, 4 University of Idaho students were found stabbed to death. The victims, Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, were vibrant, young, and full of promise. The small, tightly knit community was left stunned. No murder weapon was recovered. No suspect was named for weeks. And perhaps most unsettling of all, no one knew why. As police urged calm and social media ran wild with speculation, the fear grew. Rumours and false leads filled the void. And yet, behind the scenes, law enforcement was tracking a suspect using a trail of digital breadcrumbs and forensic evidence. What emerged was the story of a criminology Ph.D. student, someone who had studied serial killers and the minds of criminals, now accused of committing one of the most chilling multiple homicides in recent American history. This is the story of the victims, the investigation, the arrest, and the man now awaiting trial. This is the Silent Casebook, where we uncover the untold truths behind the world's most haunting crimes. When tragedy struck the quiet college town of Moscow, Idaho, it didn't just leave a community in shock. It stole 4 vibrant, hopeful young lives. Each of the University of Idaho students killed in the early morning hours of November the 13th, 2022, had their own journey, dreams, and impact on the people around them. There was Kaylee Goncalves. Kaylee was the second youngest of 5 siblings, and a fiercely independent spirit. From an early age, she was known for her adventurous personality, magnetic energy, and sharp wit. Friends described her as ambitious and fearless, someone who chased life with open arms. She had just bought her first car, a Range Rover, and had travelled back to Moscow that weekend to show it to her lifelong best friend, Madison. Though she had already moved out of the King Road house, Kaylee returned for the weekend to spend time with friends and attend a football game. Kaylee had accepted a tech job offer in Austin, Texas, and was preparing to move there in early 2023. Her family spoke of her with pride. She was the first in the family to truly step out of Idaho for career opportunities. She also had a strong bond with her dog, Murphy, whom she adopted during college. Murphy survived the attack and was found in the house unharmed. There was Madison Mogen. Madison, known affectionately as Maddie, had a soft but striking presence. With an easy smile and a deeply empathetic heart, she was often the one friends turned to for support or a laugh. She and Kaylee had been best friends since childhood, inseparable since 6th grade, and had shared nearly every major life event together. A talented student and aspiring marketing professional, Madison balanced her studies with a part-time job at the Mad Greek restaurant in downtown Moscow, where she worked with Xana Kernodle. Her boyfriend, Jake Schringer, was devastated by her death, having been close with Madison for years. She lived in the King Road house and had been out with Kaylee the night before the murders. Surveillance footage from a local food truck captured the 2 girls at around 1:41 a.m., appearing calm and enjoying their night just hours before the attack. There was Xana Kernodle. Xana was vibrant, athletic, and deeply loved by those who knew her. Known for her bold personality and lively presence, she was always moving, always laughing, and always surrounded by friends. She was passionate about health, fitness, and travelling, often sharing adventures on social media. She worked at the Mad Greek restaurant alongside Madison, and was admired by co-workers and customers alike for her energy and kindness. Friends described Xana as someone who would defend anyone she cared about, and had a sharp, fun-loving spirit. Xana was dating Ethan Chapin, and they were reportedly very close. That night, the two had attended a Sigma Chi party together before returning to the King Road house. Evidence suggests Xana may have been awake during the attack, and that she may have even fought back, showing the same fierce spirit she was known for in life. Ethan Chapin. Ethan was the only male victim, and a unique soul full of charm, kindness, and vitality. He was one of a set of triplets, along with his brother Hunter and sister Maisie. All 3 siblings enrolled at the University of Idaho together. Ethan was a standout student athlete in high school and carried the same positive, team-focused energy into his college years. He had a deep love for the outdoors, playing sports and being around people. Described as cheerful and down-to-earth, Ethan was quick to offer help and known for being easygoing. Ethan didn't live at the King Road residence, but was spending the night with his girlfriend, Xana. In a cruel twist of fate, he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Yet his presence there was a reflection of his love and loyalty. His parents described him as our beloved boy, who lived every day with joy and purpose. Together, these four young people represented the best of what life at university should be: friendship, growth, opportunity, and love. The ripple effects of their deaths have been profound, not only on their families, but for the entire University of Idaho community and beyond. In the darkness of the early morning on Saturday, November the 13th, 2022, the quiet college town of Moscow, Idaho became the scene of a quadruple homicide so brutal, so calculated, that it left investigators stunned and the nation horrified. What began as a normal Saturday night for University of Idaho students ended in unimaginable violence inside the house at 1122 King Road. The residence was a 6-bedroom, 3-bathroom home, structured on 3 staggered levels built into a hillside. It housed 5 young women, with the 6th bedroom often used by visitors or boyfriends. The layout played a crucial role in what happened that night. On the ground level, 2 surviving roommates slept in rooms on this floor. No evidence suggests that they were attacked. The 2nd floor housed Xana Kernodle and Ethan Chapin in one room, and another roommate in a separate room. The 3rd floor housed Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogen, who shared a bed in Madison's room. The home had a sliding glass door on the 2nd floor, frequently used as a main entrance, accessible by an outdoor staircase due to the sloped terrain. Police believe this was likely the point of entry for the killer. At 1:40 a.m., Kaylee and Madison are seen at the Grub Truck food truck after visiting the Corner Club bar. They appeared relaxed and unaware of danger. Sometime between 1:45 to 2 a.m., Kaylee and Madison return home via private party ride service. At 1:45 a.m., Xana and Ethan arrive home after attending a Sigma Chi fraternity party. By 2 a.m., all 6 house occupants are believed to be inside the home. Cell tower records, video surveillance, and forensic data suggest the killer's movement began shortly after. Law enforcement believes that the killings occurred between 4 and 4:25 a.m., a window narrowed through phone data, surveillance footage, and a surviving roommate's account. The following sequence is reconstructed from court documents and autopsy summaries. It's believed that the suspect likely entered through the sliding glass doors on the 2nd floor. There were no signs of forced entry, and the door may have been unlocked. He was dressed in black clothing, wore a mask covering his nose and mouth, and had bushy eyebrows, according to a surviving roommate who saw him. Kaylee and Madison were found in the same bed in Madison's room on the top floor. The two had shared a lifelong friendship, and now devastatingly had shared their final moments of their lives together. According to the coroner, both women were likely asleep when the attack began. There were no signs of defensive wounds on Madison, indicating that she may have died within seconds of being attacked. Kaylee, however, endured significantly more trauma. Kaylee's wounds were described as significantly more brutal than the others. One law enforcement source stated that Kaylee had gouge wounds to the chest and upper body so severe they were described as tearing injuries, not just stab wounds. Her injuries suggested she may have been the primary target, or that the killer returned for her after attacking Madison. The sheer number of wounds and the depth and overlap made autopsy photos too graphic for even seasoned officers. Near the bed, police recovered a tan leather knife sheath with a United States Marine Corps insignia partially tucked under Madison's body. It bore a snap button closure, which retained a single male DNA source. This would prove critical in identifying the suspect. Xana and Ethan were found in Xana's bedroom on the 2nd floor. Unlike the victims upstairs, Xana fought back. Her room told a different story, one of chaos, confusion, and resistance. Xana had severe defensive wounds to her arms, including deep lacerations across her fingers and palms. She had bruising around her knuckles, which suggested she may have physically struck the attacker in self-defense. Forensic reports suggest that Xana may have been awake on her phone at around 4:12 a.m., possibly using TikTok. She likely saw the killer or heard the attacks and had only seconds to respond before being attacked herself. Blood was smeared across the walls of her room and pooled on the floor. Ethan Chapin, who did not live at the house but had stayed the night with Xana, was found near the doorway. His wounds were described as multiple deep stabs to the neck and torso, delivered with extreme force. Investigators believe he may have stood up or opened the door during the attack and was struck immediately. Their room was, according to multiple sources, the most violent scene in the house. One officer later told a colleague that the bedroom looked like a war zone. The injuries to all four victims were consistent with a fixed-blade military-style knife. The weapon allowed for deep, clean penetrations, but also caused wide, tearing wounds when pulled back. Some of the wounds were so deep that they penetrated internal organs and struck bone. According to preliminary autopsy findings, each victim suffered multiple stab wounds, with Kaylee and Ethan receiving the highest number. Blood steeped through the floorboards and became visible from the outside of the house, an indication of just how much blood was lost. There was blood splatter, cast-off, and pooling in multiple rooms, with clear signs of movement in Xana's room. Despite the violence, the killer left behind very little trace of himself, other than the knife sheath and a single shoe print. No fingerprints, no dropped hair, no weapon, just destruction. Moscow Police Department officers, many of whom had never seen a homicide before, were devastated by what they encountered. One officer reportedly vomited at the scene, while others requested immediate psychological debriefing and counseling. Police Chief James Fry later acknowledged publicly that the emotional toll on the department had been profound, especially given the age of the victims and the community ties. Idaho State Police and the FBI soon stepped in to support the overwhelmed local authorities. The University of Idaho also offered grief counseling to officers, staff, and students, as the scene was too much for even experienced investigators to process without trauma. The crime scene told a story even before any suspect was identified. The killer had entered with a plan, likely through the second-floor sliding glass door, and targeted the victims systematically, skipping two other roommates. They moved quickly, inflicting fatal stab wounds with extreme efficiency, and exited quietly, leaving behind only blood and silence. It was methodical and monstrous, a deliberate act of predation cloaked in the stillness of early morning. What strikes me most about this crime is not just the violence, but the order within the chaos. The attacker knew what he was doing. He bypassed doors, avoided leaving fingerprints, and struck with sheer precision. But that one mistake, the knife sheath, was the break that the victims deserved. I can't imagine what it took for those officers to walk through that house and stay composed. 4 young lives stolen in the space of 20 minutes, and their silence only broken by a trail of evidence soaked in blood. For many following this case, one of the most haunting mysteries wasn't the brutality of the murders, but the long, eerie silence that followed. When the call came in just before noon on November the 13th, 2022, Moscow police believed they were responding to an unconscious person, but what they found inside 1122 King Road shocked even the most experienced officers. The scene was gruesome. 4 young students brutally murdered in the early hours of the morning. There was no sign of forced entry, no murder weapon, and no clear motive. And from that moment forward, what had initially seemed like a medical emergency became one of the most closely watched criminal investigations in recent American history. The 911 call that alerted police to the crime scene has become one of the most puzzling and heavily scrutinized elements of this case. It was placed at 11:58 a.m., nearly 8 hours after the murders are believed to have taken place. The call originated from the phone of one of the surviving roommates and was initially reported to dispatchers as a response to an unconscious person. Until recently, the actual content of that call was unknown. Now, with the release of the 911 audio, the public can hear the moment the outside world first became aware of the tragedy on King Road.
911 location of your emergency.
Hi, something is happening. Something happened in our house. We don't know what.
What is the address of the emergency?
1122.
What is the rest of the address?
Oh, Kings Road.
Okay. And is that a house or an apartment?
It's a house.
Can you repeat the address to make sure that I have it right?
I'll talk to you guys. We live at the White, so we're next to them.
I need someone to repeat the address for verification.
The address, 1122 King Road.
And what's the phone number that you're calling from?
What's your phone number?
And tell me exactly what's going on.
One of the roommates has passed out, and she was drunk last night, and she's not waking up.
Okay.
Oh, and they saw some man in their house last night. Yeah. Hi, this is...
And are you with the patient? Okay, I need someone to keep the phone, stop passing it around.
Can I just tell you what happened pretty much?
What is going on currently? Is someone passed out right now?
I don't really know, but pretty much at 4 a.m.
Okay, I need to know what's going on right now if someone is passed out. Can you find that out?
Yeah, I'll come. Come on, but we gotta go check. But we have to. Is he passed out? She's not waking up.
Okay, one moment. I'm getting help started that way.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and how old is she?
She's 20.
20, you said?
Yes, 20. Here's one.
Okay.
Hello? Hello?
Okay, I need someone to stop passing the phone around because I've talked to 4 different people.
Okay, sorry, they just gave me the phone.
Is she breathing?
Hello?
Is she breathing?
No.
Okay.
You talk to them, say. I can't talk to them. They need you to talk to them.
Hello.
Okay. I've already sent the ambulance and law enforcement. Stay on the line. If there is a defibrillator available, send someone to get it now and tell me when you have it.
Say that again. There's a police here right now.
Okay. If there is a defibrillator available, send someone to get it now and tell me when you have it.
We don't have one. I think yes. Do you have a defibrillator? Yes, you have one.
Are you talking to the officer?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to let you go since he's there with you and can help you.
Okay.
This 8-hour delay fueled enormous speculation. The roommates were alive in the house for hours. One of them, referred to in court documents as DM, told police that she had seen a masked man leaving through the sliding glass door at around 4 a.m. So why wait until noon? Law enforcement has never given a definitive answer. Theories vary, but are all troubling. Some believe the survivors were simply in shock, that the mind confronted with something unthinkable went numb. Others suggest they may have believed their housemates were simply asleep or intoxicated. After all, it was a weekend morning in a college town. There's also the possibility that the layout of the house, with all 3 levels and private bedrooms, contributed to a false sense of normalcy. If a bedroom door was closed and nothing seemed out of place, it's conceivable that the roommates simply didn't realize what had happened. But then comes the most unsettling theory of all, that someone did suspect, but either froze out of fear or feared being implicated. That uncertainty, that vacuum of clarity, only adds to the eerie silence surrounding those missing hours. We'll explore the leading theories behind the delay in the 911 call. The first theory is psychological shock or disassociation. One theory is that the roommates experienced trauma-induced disassociation, a psychological phenomenon where the brain protects itself by detaching from reality. The confusion and fragmentation heard in the 911 call supports this idea. The second theory is misinterpretation of the scene. It is possible that the victims, particularly those upstairs, were not obviously bloody or wounded from the roommate's vantage point. A partially covered body might look like someone simply sleeping or passed out. The third theory is group uncertainty. Reports indicate that friends were called to the house before 911. In moments of confusion, people often defer to others. If no one took the lead, a tragic delay could have occurred while people talked themselves out of panic. Another theory is fear or legal trouble or implication. Though there is no evidence supporting this theory, some believe there may have been reluctance to call the police out of fear, either of being blamed or facing scrutiny. This remains speculative and has not been supported by any public statement or official filing. There is another theory which is an unknown variable. It is also possible that we simply don't have all the facts yet. There may be messages, events, or observations from those hours that haven't been publicly released, still sealed under the gag order, or part of the state's trial strategy. Despite the confusion of the 911 call and the delays in understanding what happened, investigators quickly mobilized. Within days, police collected hundreds of surveillance videos from nearby homes and businesses. The white Elantra was spotted passing the King Road residence repeatedly between 3:29 a.m. and 4:20 a.m. before speeding away from the scene. Investigators began pulling cell tower data. When investigators released a public call for help in locating a white Elantra, they didn't name a suspect, nor did they reveal how crucial the vehicle was. But behind the scenes, that car was the centerpiece of a digital and physical trail, a ghost vehicle seen circling the victim's neighborhood, tied to a driver who lived just across the state line. Using data from cameras and digital surveillance tools, investigators built a timeline of Kohberger's car movements. Late on the evening of November the 12th, the Elantra leaves Pullman and travels towards Moscow. Then at around 3:30 a.m. on November the 13th, the vehicle was seen making multiple passes near Kings Road. At 4:20 a.m., the car speeds away from the neighborhood, traveling southbound on Walenta Drive. Between 4:50 and 5:30 a.m., the car is spotted in Idaho, traveling through rural roads in what appears to be an attempt to avoid main highways. These movements were considered consistent with an effort to avoid detection, especially after committing a violent crime. Following the murders, Kohberger's behavior changed, but only subtly. He continued attending classes at Washington State University. Professors and classmates noted he was more quiet and withdrawn, but still present. He was observed cleaning out his car, even wearing surgical gloves at times, actions that would later raise suspicion. Police believed that Kohberger attempted to clean and possibly sanitize his vehicle to eliminate forensic evidence. However, by the time the FBI seized the car in December, it had already traveled over 2,500 miles back to Pennsylvania, where Kohberger had returned for the winter break. Despite this, investigators were able to analyze the vehicle's interior upholstery, carpets, trunk, and side panels. They reportedly recovered trace evidence, including possible hair strands and fibers, though these findings have not yet been made public in full detail due to the ongoing pre-trial process. The arrest of Bryan Kohberger stunned the public, not just because of the charges, but because of who he was. A doctoral student in criminology, living a quiet life just 10 miles from the crime scene, Kohberger didn't fit the public's image of a spree killer. But behind the academic credentials was a man whose past was marked by deep psychological struggles, social isolation, and a lifelong obsession with the criminal mind. Bryan Kohberger, born Bryan Christopher Kohberger on November the 21st, 1994, in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. His parents were Michael and Marianne Kohberger. His father worked as a maintenance worker, and his mother worked in education as a paraprofessional in the Pleasant Valley School District. Bryan grew up in Monroe County, Pennsylvania. He was the youngest of 3 children, with 2 older sisters. The family was described by neighbors as quiet and normal, and there were no known incidents of violence or criminal activity prior to Bryan's arrest. Kohberger's early years were reportedly marked by bullying and social isolation. Former classmates from Pleasant Valley High School, where he graduated in 2013, recalled him as overweight during most of his school years, which led to frequent teasing and bullying. He was awkward and quiet, often speaking in a robotic or overly formal tone, and was obsessed with topics like law enforcement, psychology, serial killers, and crime, well beyond what most students found typical or comfortable. One former friend noted that Bryan underwent a drastic transformation in his late teens. He lost over 100 pounds, started boxing, and appeared to develop an air of superiority about his physical discipline. But the change didn't bring him social ease. It reportedly made him more intense, more reclusive, and more rigid in how he interacted with others. Kohberger is known to have suffered from visual snow syndrome, a rare neurological condition that causes visual distortions, including static-like visual noise, halos around objects, and persistent after-images. This condition is not psychological in origin, but it can lead to chronic anxiety, depression, and depersonalization. Kohberger was a Ph.D. candidate in criminology at the Washington State University. He moved to Washington in August 2022, just 3 months before the murders. He worked as a teaching assistant, although students later said he was a harsh and awkward grader who became more disorganized after November. In 2022, Kohberger posted a research study on Reddit under a university-linked account, seeking responses from criminals for a study titled Understanding How Emotions and Psychological Traits Influence Decision-Making When Committing a Crime. The questionnaire included questions such as, how did you leave the scene? What was your first move after the scene? Did you prepare for the crime beforehand? These posts, now chilling in hindsight, were part of his attempt to understand the criminal process from the inside, a pursuit that now seems disturbingly self-reflective. Following the killings, Kohberger returned to his family home in Pennsylvania to spend the holidays with his parents. Surveillance showed him behaving strangely during this time. He was seen wearing surgical gloves while grocery shopping, and also seen deep cleaning his car in the driveway. His cell phone data showed a history of travel consistent with fleeing suspicion. While he remained outwardly composed, investigators later stated that his behavior, movements, and psychological profile all matched a suspect preparing to evade law enforcement. By the final week of December 2022, the walls were closing in on Bryan Kohberger. Unbeknownst to him, federal agents and Pennsylvania State Police were monitoring his every move, watching from unmarked vehicles outside his family's home in Albrightsville. After weeks of collecting evidence, analyzing surveillance footage, tracking cell phone movements, and matching DNA, law enforcement was ready to move. The suspect, an intensely private Ph.D. student who had once studied how criminals think, was about to be caught in the very system he thought he understood. In the early hours of December 30th, 2022, a tactical team descended on the Kohberger family residence. It was just after 1:30 a.m. when they breached the front door. Bryan Kohberger was asleep in a first-floor bedroom. Armed officers burst in and took him into custody without incident. They later described him as emotionless, eerily calm, and saying very little. Inside the home, agents found Kohberger's white Elantra parked in the driveway. They quickly towed it away to be examined for forensic evidence. In the days that followed, the car would undergo a detailed analysis, including DNA swabbing, vacuum for traces of fibers and hairs, and a chemical search for blood evidence using luminol. Authorities believed he may have deep cleaned the vehicle in the days prior, possibly using gloves and cleaning agents to remove traces of the crime. As the news of the arrest broke, the public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. For nearly 7 weeks, the case had captured international attention, and now, finally, there was a name. Bryan Kohberger, 28 years old, a criminology scholar, a man whose interest in understanding the minds of murderers may have evolved into something far more sinister. Back in Idaho, investigators revealed their theory that Kohberger had stalked the King Road house at least a dozen times prior to the murders, that he had driven his car to and from the scene under the cover of night, that he had likely watched the victims in their final days, and that he had left behind one thing that unraveled it all: a knife sheath with his DNA on the snap button. Following his arrest, Kohberger waived extradition. In court, he appeared pale, stone-faced, and silent. He was flown back to Idaho on January 4th, 2023, under tight security. Once in Moscow, he was officially charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary. The nation's eyes turned once again to the small town that had been rocked by horror just weeks before, but this time there was a face to fear. The man who had lived just across the border, attended classes on criminal theory, and quietly walked among his peers as investigators closed in. In the wake of the arrest, law enforcement began piecing together Kohberger's behavior in the weeks following the killings. It emerged that he had driven across the county with his father in the very car linked to the crime, making casual small talk with police during a traffic stop in Indiana. Footage from that stop, now infamous, showed Kohberger speaking calmly with the officers as his father sat beside him, unaware of what his son was suspected of doing. Investigators believe Kohberger kept a low profile during his visit home. He was seen taking out the trash late at night, wearing surgical gloves in public places, and cleaning his vehicle obsessively, all signs they believed of someone trying to erase the past. But it was too late. The physical evidence, the digital trail, and the forensic DNA match had already spoken for him. For the families of the victims, the arrest was a step towards justice, but it wasn't closure. It was just the beginning of a long legal road. And for the town of Moscow, the name Bryan Kohberger would forever be tied to the quiet horror that unfolded in the early hours of November the 13th. What remains now is the question of why. Why these victims? Why this act? Why would someone so deeply immersed in criminal theory carry out such a calculated, violent crime? So after months of speculation, silence, and slow-building evidence, the case of the state of Idaho versus Bryan Kohberger finally reached the courtroom. But as the legal process began to unfold, it became clear that this trial would be anything but straightforward. With the death penalty on the table, an enormous volume of evidence, and a defense team challenging nearly every aspect of the prosecution's case, the road to justice became a meticulous, high-stakes legal battle. Bryan Kohberger made his first court appearance in Idaho on January 5, 2023, just 1 day after being extradited from Pennsylvania. He appeared before Judge Megan Marshall in Latta County District Court, facing 4 charges of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary. Dressed in an orange jail-issued jumpsuit and wearing shackles, Kohberger remained mostly silent. When asked to enter a plea during his arraignment on May 22, 2023, he refused to respond, prompting the judge to enter a not guilty plea on his behalf. From the start, both sides signaled their intent to fight. The prosecution, led by Latta County prosecutor Bill Thompson, announced in June 2023 that the state would seek the death penalty, citing several aggravating factors: the multiple victims, the particularly heinous and cruel nature of the killings, and the argument that Kohberger poses a continuing threat to society. Under Idaho law, a jury must unanimously agree on the death sentence if he is convicted. In August 2023, Kohberger's legal team filed a motion to dismiss the indictment, arguing that the grand jury was improperly instructed on the legal standard of proof. They also raised issues about insufficient evidence and questioned whether the genetic genealogy methods used to link the suspect's DNA to the knife sheath were legally sound. The court denied the motion, allowing the indictments to stand, but the defense has continued to appeal aspects of the ruling, and further hearings are pending. Throughout pre-trial proceedings, Kohberger's defense has pushed for more transparency and access to the state's forensic and investigative records. They have filed motions to compel discovery, citing concerns over how DNA was processed, how phone data was interpreted, and the methods used to gain evidence from Kohberger's vehicle and home. In turn, the prosecution has maintained that all procedures followed legal standards and chain of custody protocols. Meanwhile, Judge Marshall imposed a sweeping gag order early in the proceedings, restricting public statements by law enforcement, attorneys, and witnesses. While the gag order was upheld by Idaho courts, it has drawn criticism from media organizations, which argue it undermines public transparency in a high-profile case. This order remains in place, meaning most updates must be obtained through court filings or official documents. The volume of evidence in the case is staggering. Prosecutors disclosed that they will present over 20,000 pieces of digital and forensic data, including cell tower records, vehicle GPS coordinates, surveillance footage, digital communications, and biological evidence from Kohberger's car and apartment. In late 2024, investigators revealed that they had recovered hair samples, possible blood traces, and items linked to the victims, although specifics remain under seal due to the gag order. The trial was originally scheduled to begin in October 2023, but due to the complexity of the case and the defense's motion practice, it has been delayed multiple times. It is expected to be one of the most closely followed trials in American criminal history. Public interest in the case remained high. Courtrooms have been packed with reporters and family members of the victims during hearings. National media outlets have covered every development, often from outside the latter county courthouse. Yet despite the enormous attention, Kohberger himself has shown little emotion. Throughout all court appearance, he has remained stoic, speaking only when directly addressed by the judge. In the days following the murder, police released limited information. They assured the public that the attack was targeted, but refused to say who was targeted or why. This lack of clarity, paired with a slow-moving investigation, created fertile ground for amateur sleuths and conspiracy theorists. TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, and Facebook quickly became platforms where rumours flourished. Innocent individuals were falsely accused, and some were even harassed online. The families of the victims begged the public to stop speculating and let law enforcement do its work. Amid this chaos, legitimate questions also emerged, many of which remain unanswered till this day. The first theory is, could one person have committed this crime alone? Perhaps the most persistent theory is the idea that the crime was too complex, too brutal, and too coordinated for one person to have executed it alone. The theory is fueled by several elements, such as the layout of the house, which involved 3 floors, 6 occupants, and multiple entry-exit points. 4 victims were killed in under 20 minutes, suggesting rapid movement and control over the scene. There was no evidence of forced entry, and 2 roommates were left unharmed, despite one reportedly seeing the masked intruder. The level of forensic discipline, few fingerprints, no murder weapon left behind, and the car quickly cleaned, struck some as inconsistent with the solo first-time offender. These factors led some online commentators and even criminologists to wonder whether Kohberger had help, whether someone else assisted in planning, surveillance, or even the act itself. However, law enforcement has repeatedly stated that Kohberger acted alone. As of April 2025, no second suspect has been identified, and prosecutors have not presented any evidence suggesting a co-conspirator. The defense has not claimed otherwise, nor have they argued that multiple attackers were involved. Still, the idea continues to echo in online spaces. Another theory that surfaced early in the investigation, particularly on local forums and social media, suggested that the murders may have been related to a drug debt or criminal retaliation. The idea that one or more of the victims, perhaps unknowingly, were associated with individuals involved in narcotics trafficking or usage. The theory speculated that the killer might have acted on behalf of a third party to send a message or collect a debt. Some even speculated that the brutality of the killings, specifically the apparent overkill inflicted on Kaylee Goncalves, was symbolic or punitive. This theory gained traction based on the violent and deliberate nature of the attack. There was a clear lack of robbery or sexual assault, suggesting a targeted vendetta. Claims from anonymous posters online that everyone in town knows there were drug connections. However, there is no verifiable evidence linking any of the victims to drug trafficking, debts, or criminal activity. Police have never suggested this as a motive, and court filings have not included drug-related elements in any official narrative. In fact, all 4 victims had clean records, were active university students, and were described by friends and family as being focused on school and relationships, not involved in risky behavior or criminal circles. While the theory still circulates in online spaces, it remains speculative and has not been supported by any law enforcement findings. The theory most closely aligned with the evidence, and one that prosecutors appear to be developing, is that the murders were premeditated and personal, committed by someone who had developed a deep fixation on one or more of the victims. This theory draws on several established facts that Kohberger's cell phone data shows repeated visits to the area around the King Road house at least 12 times prior to the murders, often in the late evening or early morning hours. He reportedly followed at least one of the victims on Instagram, although these accounts were later deleted or set to private. The use of a military-style knife, the execution-style nature of the attack, and the lack of physical or verbal interaction suggests the killer may have acted out a rehearsed fantasy, not a spontaneous outburst. This theory suggests Kohberger's academic interest in criminology was more than educational. It was personal. It may have escalated from study to obsession to action. As of 2025, this remains the primary theory of motive in the prosecution's case. As the legal process inches towards trial, one question remains more elusive than any other. Why? Why would a 28-year-old Ph.D. student in criminology, a man with no known criminal record, no public history of violence, and no confirmed connection to the victims, allegedly commit one of the most brutal mass murders in recent American history? So was this the act of a stalker obsessed with control, a person living out a violent fantasy, or a man consumed by the very crimes he studied? The motive remains an open void, and one that makes the case all the more chilling. While a knife sheath was found under the bodies of Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogen, with a single source of male DNA on the button snap, the actual knife has never ever been recovered. Police believe it was a large, fixed-blade, military-style weapon, possibly a K-bar. Extensive searches in rural Idaho and even at Kohberger's parents' property in Pennsylvania turned up nothing. Did he dispose of it with precision? Or did someone else take it? Or less likely, but still possible, was it never his to begin with? The absence of the weapon remains a significant evidentiary gap. Some fringe theories speculate that Kohberger was set up or manipulated. They point to the lack of a clear motive, the isolated DNA, the missing weapon, the speed and precision of the crime. Could someone else have committed the murders, with Kohberger merely present nearby? Could his fascination with criminology and odd behavior have made him a convenient target? There's no evidence to support these theories, and law enforcement has consistently maintained that Kohberger acted alone. But until a jury hears the full case, some will continue to question whether we truly understand what happened. The knife sheath is real, the DNA match is real, but the silence, both in the hours after the crime and in the questions that remain, echoes louder than any piece of evidence. We may never know why the 911 call came so late. We may never know what Kohberger thought, or felt, or planned. But what we do know is that 4 lives were taken, brutally, silently, without warning. Whether Kohberger is guilty or not will be determined in court, but until every question is answered, the silent casebook remains open. As of April 2025, the case of the state of Idaho versus Bryan Kohberger stands on the edge of a courtroom showdown. More than 2 years have passed since the brutal murders of Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. 2 years of grief, speculation, legal wrangling, and unanswered questions. And now the world awaits for what comes next, the trial. The court has now officially scheduled the trial to begin on August the 11th, 2025, with jury selection set to commence on July the 30th. Due to the enormous media coverage and emotional weight of the case in Moscow, Idaho, the trial has been relocated to Boise to ensure a fair jury pool. Proceedings are expected to last roughly 3 months, potentially stretching into November. Over that time, the court will hear from dozens of witnesses, review thousands of pieces of forensic and digital evidence, and consider critical motions from both sides. Among the key issues, the DNA evidence from the knife sheath found at the crime scene. Kohberger's defense continues to question the reliability of the genetic genealogy process and chain of custody surrounding the evidence, arguing that the methods used may introduce reasonable doubt. The prosecution, meanwhile, has disclosed Amazon purchase records that allegedly tie Kohberger to the purchase of a K-bar and a sheath prior to the murders, evidence they say supports premeditation. The defense has moved to suppress these records, calling them prejudicial. Another controversial piece of evidence is a selfie Kohberger reportedly took just hours after the crime. In the photo, he stands in a bathroom, dressed neatly, giving a thumbs up. Prosecutors argue this photo is relevant because it clearly shows his facial features, specifically his eyebrows, and could support the eyewitness account from the surviving roommate, who claims she saw a masked intruder with bushy eyebrows exiting the house. The defense has called this comparison unfair and speculative. Also up for debate is whether the jurors will be allowed to hear the 911 call made nearly 8 hours after the killings. The prosecution insisted it qualifies as an excited utterance, a legal exception to hearsay rules, while the defense warns it could unfairly influence the jury's perception of events and timelines. In a related ruling, Judge Stephen Hippler determined that Kohberger's autism diagnosis cannot be used by the prosecution as an aggravating factor in seeking the death penalty. However, the defense may introduce it as a mitigating factor if Kohberger is convicted and the case moves to the sentencing phase. Meanwhile, the town of Moscow continues to rebuild its sense of peace. The house at 1122 King Road has been demolished, removed at the request of the university and the victims' families. The crime was so gruesome that, according to investigators, blood had seeped through the floorboards and was visible from the outside of the house. Quite literally, the house was bleeding. That image became a symbol of the horror that unfolded within its walls, and a pain the community could not ignore. In its place will one day stand a memorial, a quiet space to remember 4 young lives that ended far too soon. Whatever the outcome of the trial, one truth remains. Justice is not a verdict. It's the long, slow reckoning with facts, motives, and consequences. It's about holding space for the victims and accountability for the accused. And in the case of Bryan Kohberger, that reckoning is just the beginning. As we close this investigation, I'm reminded that silence can be both shelter and disguise. In the silence of that house, 4 lives ended. In the silence of the weeks that followed, a community grieved. And now in the silence of the courtroom, a verdict will one day be delivered. Whether Bryan Kohberger is guilty or not, the truth must not be built on theories, but on evidence. And until every question is answered, the silent casebook remains opened. If this case moved you, informed you, or made you think deeper about the systems meant to deliver justice, we ask just one thing. Don't let the story end here. Share this episode, subscribe for future investigations, and help keep these stories alive.